This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Welcome to Dialogue. Japan still says it will hold the Tokyo Olympic Games even as the nation battles a fourth wave of COVID-19 infections, and Tokyo remains under a state of emergency until the end of this month. With rising opposition from the public and surging cases, will the Games be hosted as expected? How will they be affected if they go ahead? And how will the COVID-19 era Olympics be celebrated and remembered? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by Liu Zhiqin, Senior Fellow from the Tungyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China, Victor Matheson, Professor of Economics at the College of the Holy Cross, and Benoit Hadi Chachuang, a Professor of Political Science and International Affairs from Temple University in Japan. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, a recent news poll released on May 16th shows that almost 60% of people in Japan believe the Tokyo Olympics and the Paralympics should be cancelled. So, Zhiqin, I will start with you. Why the sour mood with the Olympic Games?
You know, this question has been lasting for many months in Japan and also in international society, because many people are doubts and skeptical whether the Olympic Game can be really smoothly held as planned. As we know that the Olympic Game already extended 1 year later to this year. So, but the pandemic outbreak in Japan is not well managed and controlled, and still they are facing a serious challenge for the new outbreak. So many people are worried about the possible consequences if the Olympic Game still in time to be held. Because the infection rate is not well controlled in Japan. This has disappointed the whole world, even in the social society in Japan. So that's why the people that always, the opinions so divided at the moment. So we can see that almost 60% are against to hold this event, but only 39 they agree, but they prefer to have the empty stadiums, that no visitors, no audience outside. So this could be really a great challenge for the government to make a final decision. But we see that these challenges could be really well discussed and solved among the public opinions if they really pay great attention to the people's life, if the people's lives are really rescued or secured by the Japanese government decision. It could be very positive for the future of Japan's society, but we have to see the economic losses could not be avoided. So if the cancellation of the Olympic Game is to come to the truth, that a big burden for the Japanese economy.
Mm-hmm. Well, Benoit, you are based in Tokyo. So we see the protests on the streets. You know, people are not happy. People are calling for cancellation. Some say we should delay again. It's different from last year. Last year, you know, many countries, ahead of the event, saying that, oh, we are not sending a delegation because of the situation. But this year, I mean, few countries have done that. So why people are so worried about the event?
Well, as the previous guest rightly pointed out, the situation at the moment, the pandemic is really bad. We are right in the middle of a fourth wave at the moment. The numbers have been trending up over the last few days. So even though overall Japan, since the beginning of the pandemic, has done fairly well, it has done better than most Western countries, the trend line has been pointing in a negative direction recently. Just over the last 7 days, the average in Tokyo only has been around almost 800 new infections per day, which is a lot higher than we had at the beginning of the year when the second state of emergency, was implemented. So now that we are only 70 days or approximately 70 days before the opening of the games, this surge in infections over the last few days and also the very slow rollout of the vaccines, all of that combined together, they basically combine to create this movement of opposition. And this opposition, I must say, is not only limited to the public. You see it as well in the political sphere as well. The opposition parties are very much opposed to the games. You have various sectors of society that are now kind of coalescing or concerting in opposition to the games.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, if you look at the figures, like in the first quarter, basically 3 months, you see the death toll of COVID-19 is already larger than the total number of last year. So the Japanese Prime Minister Suga has said that he's committed to a safe and secure Olympics. So what has the government been doing to inspire confidence in the public?
Well, there has been a few things that the government has done to inspire confidence. First of all, the measures that will be in place during the Olympics are quite important. As most people are probably aware, by this time, the government has now announced that there will not be any spectators from abroad coming for the Olympics. It will be limited to the athletes as well as some media. When it comes to but domestic spectators, residents from Japan, the decision remains to be taken. So as far as the public is concerned, as far as the environment within the stadiums, within the places of competition, it will not be a normal Olympic. On top of that, there are various measures that will be taken at the event sites. We're talking about disinfection, of course. We're talking about temperature checks as well. They have made sure to have a large number of nurses and medical professionals coming in from various parts of the country in Tokyo. So the government seems to have taken a lot of steps and measures to ensure the confidence of the public in the possibility of holding safe games. But as mentioned in my previous response to your question, so far the public doesn't seem to be responding very positively despite these drastic steps and measures, including, by the way, the fact that many events have been canceled. Ceremonies, various like the Rally of the Torch, for example, many parts of the rallies have been canceled or diverted. So many things have been done, but not yet a very positive response from the public.
Mm-hmm. Well, to be fair, Japan is one of the Asian countries which have seen a surging situation, like in Southeast Asian countries, of course, from India to Malaysia, Thailand, etc., Singapore. So you cannot blame, I would say, Japanese government. That's not really fair. But again, if you look at the vaccination, the rate of vaccination in Japan is only 3% of the population. So it's really not that, encouraging. Why is that? What the government has been doing?
So when it comes to the vaccination, so indeed 3% have been vaccinated, but if you look at people who are completely immunized at this point, it's not even 2%. We're talking only about 1.3%, which is much, much lower than what we have seen in other countries, in Western countries, or in China for that matter. And there are various reasons for that, although it is quite surprising given the fact that the Olympics will be held this year in Tokyo. You would have thought, or one would have thought, that the governments would have done a better effort to roll out the vaccine quickly. But there are two main reasons to explain why the vaccination has not gone as fast as most people would have hoped. One is the fact that Japan does not manufacture its own vaccines. That means that it has to import all of the vaccines. And additionally, as well, even when the vaccines have already been approved abroad, there needs to be the government request or demands that there are further clinical trials conducted in Japan. So combine these two factors together, and it results in the current situation where not even 2% of the population is fully immunized, and they still haven't completely vaccinated the elderly population. So that is quite a scandal here. It's quite controversial, and many people in the media and in my own entourage, the people that I know in my community, very, very disappointed and angry at the government for the way the rollout has gone on.
Mm-hmm. Well, Victor, you are based in Boston. Looking at the events unfolding in Japan, looking at that from afar, Zhiqin, again, to you here, the question, looking at the situation in Japan, are you confident personally, okay, the Olympic Games should go ahead as planned in later June next month? Zhiqin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that for this government has two difficulties situation to adjust. First, whether they can convince the people to have vaccinated. And the second is also the personal decision for the Japanese society, whether they are really eager to do it. Because they have different opinions and the data from the international society, especially from European countries, also from the United States. Some people still believe that the vaccination is not so well prepared, a good tool for prevention of the dynamic outbreak of this pandemic. So in this way, that the social confidence is really a very important factor for this situation. But I hope that nowadays that the time is very pressing for the Japanese government, also for the society. They should know what is really needed to do, to be done. Mm-hmm. And also for the life secure, they should do a faster and qualified vaccination. This is not only for the Olympic game, this is also for the future safety of the Japanese society and even economic development.
Probably a more aggressive manner over there. But if you look at the latest figure, the economic figure, for example, Zhiqin, the Japanese economy contracted at an annual rate of 5.1% in the first quarter, January to March. Household spending consumption also dropped. Obviously, I'm wondering, how might these figures, not that inspiring, let's say, might affect the Japanese efforts, preparing for the stage of this event?
Yeah, that's a big problem for the Japanese economy, even for the enterprise. This afternoon, I had a discussion with Japanese banks in Beijing. Also, we are informed that all these Japanese banks and enterprises, they are already preparing for the online business. They also upgraded their facilities to work at home and also try to stimulate and promote more consumption for the economy. But at the moment, they need some time also to digest the situation, also to digest the state policy, whether they should go in this direction. Because nowadays, they have the opinion divided in the society. Some still believe that they can do the best as the other countries, but some people, they are skeptical that the government is not qualified and loses the best opportunities and the chances that to prevent the pandemic outbreak. So that's why this opinion should be combined, should be unified. Otherwise, all the efforts will be divided in the society. This is not good for the Japanese society, even very bad influence for this Olympic game. Nowadays, if they really want to host the Olympic game in time, they should hold the society, should concentrate its all efforts to prevent, to prepare, and to do the best job for the Olympic game. Also try to make this Olympic game as the best one during the dynamic outbreak. Maybe this is a good historical experience for all countries in the future, in the natural disasters, how to organize an Olympic game. This is also a good lesson and a good experience for the Japanese government, also the people.
Benoit, obviously, the economic figures, like household spending, consumption, is closely related to the restrictions being imposed by the government, because it's an emergency state, which will last until the end of this month. We don't know, what will happen in 2 weeks' time, whether the emergency state will be extended again, how will the situation be like in June. I mean, how confident are you? You are in Tokyo, you look at the numbers, obviously that's not that encouraging, as Zhiqin said, but this could be an opportunity to make it a historical event.
No, absolutely. And this is why a lot of people are hoping that the state of emergency that is currently ongoing will be lifted at the end of May. But already there have been some extensions. Just over the last few days, the state of emergency has been extended to many more prefectures. Prefectures in Japan, I believe we are now at 9 prefectures that are under the state of emergency. And this has obviously worried a lot of people because if at the end of the month, the government believes that the state of emergency must be extended once more, that will continue to call into question even further the capacity of the government to hold these games. So I think what we are seeing at the moment is a kind of last-ditch attempt by the government to, through the state of emergency, bring these numbers, bring the figures, the number of infections low enough so that there is at least a minimal public confidence in the capacity of the government, capacity of the organizing committee to hold the Olympics in a safe manner. Because so far, as I said earlier, it's not really trending in the right direction. The economic numbers, as you very rightly pointed out earlier as well, are not trending in the right direction. The lockdowns, or I wouldn't really call it a lockdown, because in Tokyo, unlike what we have seen in many Western cities or in China for that matter, we have not been able to, the government has not been able to impose a strict lockdown. But nonetheless, the fact that there are restrictions right now, the fact that the numbers are rising, this indeed contributes to lower consumption and has contributed directly to the contraction of the economy by 5.1%. And anecdotally, it's obvious around me. I see a lot of people who are obviously worried about the virus and decide not to hold any kind of events, not to go to restaurants, not to meet in public, and that goes a long way towards explaining the economic figures and also the opposition of the public.
Now we are joined by Professor Victor Matherson from Boston. So Victor, the Olympic Games were supposed to boost the economy of Japan, or for the city of Tokyo for that matter. So now, because of obviously the absence of the audience and also the streamlining of the delegation from different countries because of the outbreak, so economically speaking, break down for us, how will the event impact the economy here?
So I think what's really important to understand here is that even before COVID hit, this was a deeply troubled Olympic Games from an economic standpoint. The original $7.5 billion budget had already ballooned to an official number of twice that, and unofficially most people were thinking that the cost had already risen to about $25 billion. In some ways, COVID makes this much worse because it adds about $3 billion of cost and probably eliminates at least $2 billion of revenue that Tokyo was planning on gaining from ticket sales and from tourism. But that's only about a $5 billion hit from COVID on a Games that was already about $15 billion over budget. So, this certainly doesn't help. But this was, again, a deeply troubled Games way before COVID caused anything to happen here. And, again, when you're talking about the sort of numbers here, you're talking about a couple $2 billion in potential tourism that's lost. When you compare that to the size of the greater Tokyo economy or the overall Japanese economy, $10 billion is about 0.1% of the Japanese economy. So the Olympic Games are gigantic symbolically. But in terms of actual economic impact, it's fairly small.
Well, thank you, Victor. There, Benoit, if you look at the measures already been taken, for example, no audience from other countries to join the game to watch, and also tourists from other countries. What can the IOC and Tokyo do more to ensure the event will go ahead as planned? For example, social distancing or vaccination for the athletes from other countries?
Right. Well, I don't think, to be very honest, that there is that much more that the Olympic Committee, the organizing committee in Tokyo, or the government, or the IOC can do to ensure safer games than the measures that have already been taken. I think the only other step that is likely to happen if the current infection trends continue in the same direction is going to be that even Japanese or residents of Japan will not be able to attend attend these games. So I think that's probably a step we're going to take. But other than that, there have been already so many restrictions that have been implemented, so many events surrounding the Olympic Games that have been canceled. Normally at this time of the year in Tokyo, we would have entertainment all around the city to kind of, whip up the atmosphere, try to bring an atmosphere of kind of Olympic fever in the city. We are not seeing any of that right now. The city, I mean, if you walk around the city, except in some neighborhoods, you would never guess that Olympics or the biggest sporting event in the world would happen within, 70 days, less than 3 months away. So already you can see that the atmosphere has been very dampened. On the site itself, you mentioned social distancing. For sure, the government has already talked about implementing these such measures for athletes as well, but there's a limit to what you can do. We're talking about athletes from all over the world. I think it's 15,000 or something like that, number of athletes that are going to be in Tokyo with their teams as well. There are limits to the kind of distancing that can be imposed in such environment. For sure, we are hoping that all athletes are going to be vaccinated, but it's not clear that this is going to be possible before they arrive in Tokyo. So while a lot of measures have been taken, there's still possibly it's really impossible basically to make sure that is going to be 100% safe under the current circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Well, Zhiqin, politics here, with this election upcoming in autumn, how might this Olympic Games, its a success or not, may affect the results? The government must have that fact also in their mind.
Well, we have to say that this impact will be very great to the autumn election in Japan. But no matter how succeed or how cancellation of this Olympic game should be one important factor that to influence the result of the election. But at the moment, we see the poll for the Suga is lower than ever before. There's 40%, as we know that. So he has some difficulties to deal with the election, whether his party and he himself could be re-elected during the autumn election. But at the moment, he still has some time to be well performed. For instance, especially the Olympic game is a test book for him. He should try to be showing that his governance and his qualification for the event is well known and well accepted by the Japanese society, especially also one important factor to promote the Japanese economy. So in this way, for the election, I mean that this Olympic game will be one of the decisive factor to influence the result. At the moment, I personally is pessimistic for the Suga, whether he could win and could be re-elected. This is really in question.
Mm-hmm. Well, Victor, you mentioned about the impact of the games on the economy would be minimum, basically. What about those, companies, firms, the business community? Obviously, they would love the event to go ahead. And what are sponsors like TV, channels? So and athletes, of course. If the event will be cancelled, so all of them will suffer from that kind of situation.
Yeah, so this is deeply disappointing for the athletes for sure. Remember, when you're an athlete, your prime time to be able to compete can be very, very short, and this may be your one chance to compete in the Olympics. And this is particularly important for those athletes not in the big popular sports. We're not worried about LeBron James or Serena Williams or Naomi Osaka here. We're worried about those athletes who are rowers or in judo and weightlifting. This is one of their only opportunities to really get on a world stage and earn those large sponsorship contracts. In terms of the companies themselves, obviously, again, certain sectors are going to be deeply hurt by this. Tourism and hospitality in a time where hotels have already been decimated across the world, and other types of transportation decimated across the world. So this is not good for them at all. In terms of the large companies, the Budweisers and the Coca-Colas, obviously they'll be able to take this in stride. But when it comes down to the final piece here, is that it's really the IOC who wants to push this, right? Because their entire revenue depends on those international sponsors, plus the 3 weeks of television that they can sell during the event. And this is their only source of revenue over a 4-year period. So if the games were canceled, this would essentially eliminate all of the money coming into the IOC. So you can understand the sort of pressure that the IOC is placing on the local host committee to make sure the games go on, so those sponsorship money keeps flowing into the IOC along with the big television revenues.
So Benoit, obviously there's a contract between IOC and Tokyo, the city over there. Most people will say IOC has the final decision whether the event should be cancelled or not. So take all the factors, the politics, economics, and of course the contract over there into consideration. How likely the event will be cancelled or delayed again?
I think it's very unlikely that there will be any cancellation or any further delay, and the reasons are those that you just pointed out. So mostly because of the contract. So it's been long understood that there could be only a 1-year delay, and time again, the Olympic Committee, the organizing committee in Tokyo, the government have said that it could not be pushed to another year later. Even though now, according to the latest surveys, the one that came out on Monday, 80% of the population is opposed to Olympics being held this August. So contractually, Tokyo would be saddled with huge costs if it decided to cancel the games. Because yes, according to the contract, the IOC is the only entity that can take this decision. Of course, Tokyo or the government here could say that we're not holding the Olympics this year, but they would be saddled with these costs because according to the contract, there are obligations in terms of the revenues that the IOC will make. The previous guest mentioned, for example, the broadcasting revenues. So Tokyo is going to be saddled with these costs. And when you put this in context, it helps to explain why the Japanese government, despite the headwinds and despite the massive opposition from the public, has continued with steadfast determination to hold these Olympics. Because although the Olympics, yes, it is true, they have relatively minimal advantages economically for the city, for the country as a whole, the cost of canceling them would still be very high. And it's also a matter of of pride too, as well. Is such the eyes of the world are going to be on Tokyo, and canceling these games would be seen as a kind of massive failure by the government, the organizing committee, and many of the people surrounding the games. So it really helps to explain why really they seem to be going full speed ahead despite the challenges.
Well, China is also preparing for the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. So Victor, economically and also in terms of preparation, what China can learn from the Tokyo Olympics here?
Well, so China's in pretty good shape, or at least much better shape than Japan is, for a handful of reasons. Obviously, the extra 6 months makes a huge amount of difference, right? If I'm sitting here in the United States, literally 0 people were vaccinated in the United States 6 months ago, and now we're already sitting at over 50%. So 6 months makes a huge amount of difference. And of course, China, as well as the United States and the UK and some other countries, have done a much better job in their vaccination programs than Japan has so far. Other things that Japan has going for it is that the Winter Olympics are a much smaller event with fewer athletes coming from predominantly rich Western nations that are more likely to be vaccinated in the first place. And the last thing that China has done fairly well is that it's really kept the cost down. Now the Summer Olympics a decade ago were extraordinarily expensive in Beijing, but this time through it looks like the Winter Olympics will come in at a cost of roughly 1/10 what the Summer Olympics came through a decade ago. And so that means that unlike Japan, in Tokyo, which was sitting at about a $25 billion bill for this Summer Olympics, the Winter Olympics is looking like about a $4 billion bill. And that, of course, is going to make both the local governments and the local citizenry much happier about hosting the event because not as much of their money is on the line as we see in Tokyo.
Seems we should be more confident about the Winter Olympics. Well, thank you. With that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests again. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. You can find me on Twitter, Xu Qinduo, one word. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome from Beijing. This is The World Today. I'm Wang Mengmang. Let's begin in the Middle East. There are continuing calls for a ceasefire as Israel continues its bombardment of Gaza and Palestinian groups responded with rocket fire. It comes a day after Israel bombed Gaza's Ministry of Health and its main coronavirus testing laboratory. Health officials say the death toll from a week of hostility stands at 213. 61 of them are children. And the United Nations says nearly